In the following series of videos, we'll be breaking down the four dominant behavioral types and explore the chemicals in the brain behind the traits that make up each personality profile, starting with the blue behavioral style. So far on this channel, we've begun to explore how personality type impacts relationships and compatibility, asserting that rather than focusing so heavily on the differences between men and women, it's actually personality profiling that offers the most value in rethinking our relationships. As we break down each individual personality type, this content can be used as both an introduction and point of reference to better understand what's driving different behaviors. Becoming familiar with the profiles of each of the four dominant personality types can help you not only identify your own behavior profile, but also that of the people you form relationships with. Being armed with this knowledge not only helps improve tolerance and understanding of others, but will also enable you to navigate relationships more effectively, leading to potentially finding more compatible partners. Before we dive into the blue personality type, it's important to note that nobody is 100% one type. It's more about which one is more dominant in your makeup, and this can fluctuate. For example, when we have more energy versus less energy, see my latest video on introversion and extroversion for a deep dive on energy or voltage levels found in different personality profiles. But higher energy is commonly found in extroverts and lower in introverts. But for example, earlier in the day or week, we can all exhibit more energy, so therefore potentially more extroverted traits. As we tire and these levels dissipate, more introverted traits can emerge. As a result, we can all adapt to multiple colours or types, but will ultimately revert back to our main or more dominant type depending on energy levels. Introversion in predominantly introverts and extroversion in extroverts becomes more obvious as energy levels dissipate. Bear in mind, when I break down each colour, I will be doing so describing the character type at the more extreme end of the spectrum, so as if we are profiling a pure blue, red, green or yellow individual. Our dominant personality type and traits associated with them are innate. We're born with them, the origins of which stem from the mind. Each colour or behavioural type maps to a specific hormone or chemical in the brain, and this is what forms our traits and drives certain behaviours. So before we dive into the makeup of a pure blue person, you will note that the traits we're about to discuss will have both positive and negative connotations. Some may not be so obvious, and perception will vary depending on factors like your own personality type, impacts of societal conditioning, and whether or not an individual is more morally flexible than another, for example. So with all that said, let's get into the makeup of the pure-blooded blue. For reference, the colour framework I'm using to categorise the four dominant behavioural types comes from Thomas Erickson's work that can be explored in his book, Surrounded by Idiots. As a pure-blooded blue, you will find yourself on the introverted side of the spectrum, detailed here in my infographic. As discussed in my recent video on introversion and extroversion, which I've linked in the description, a blue will typically emit lower levels of this energy or voltage that in higher levels can be directly linked to addiction in relationships, which stems from the traits or characteristics that forms an individual's personality. I've included a collection of blue traits. Now this is not an exhaustive list, however provides a great overview of the type of person we are discussing here. Analytical, detail-focused, objective, fact-seeker, logical, rule-follower, correct, conscientious, meticulous and reserved are just some of the clearly identifiable blue traits. Blues in other psychological studies and literature are also referenced to as builders or pillars of society, as moral conduct is extremely important to them. Honour, duty and immense loyalty are clear characteristics of a blue whose natural instincts are to serve on a large scale. Therefore, in relationships, they take dating and commitment extremely seriously. They're not so amused or easily swayed by devious, flashy or outwardly sexual people, but instead gravitate toward reserved, respectful and down-to-earth, well-grounded types. These traits make blues extremely family and community-oriented, displaying a great degree of conscientiousness, something we will come to near the end of the video. They are typically cautious, so initially short and formal works very well with striking an initial spark or connection with blues. Being traditional themselves, it's no surprise they lean toward a more traditional approach, attracted to those who maintain their reserve, are thoughtful and considerate of others. They're extremely reliable and in turn value and respect reliability. A pure blue is built to admire and follow social norms, respect authority, closely follows rules, and they enjoy making plans and, importantly, stick to them. Extremely analytical, detail-focused, and well-structured individuals. A blue thinks concretely, literal, and orderly. Perfectionists, methodical, and always scrutinizing. They are cautious but not fearful people who, despite their introverted character, tend to be rather social people. Not in the life and soul of the party social, but rather in a community building type of way. A blue's traits make them very good at managing people, both at work and in social circles. So in this respect, they are social societal builders, and very efficient ones at that. Blues are extremely reflecting and reserved. At times this can make them seem distant or insecure, always needing time to reflect, think, and then conclude. But this is only a perception. Blues are in fact extremely self-assured and confident people. They are introverted but not shy, often reflecting deeply before acting. On the surface, this can be difficult to work out with a blue introvert, especially if you're an extrovert yourself, but this is an example of where personality type drives our perception, which is not necessarily objective reality. But what is it that actually forms our personality type in the first place? What is the driving force behind who we are? It's actually the chemicals in our brain that produce our traits, behaviors, and therefore forms our personality. For blues and the traits we have discussed, it's serotonin, the mother of all neurotransmitters and probably the most well-researched of them all. It influences various functions, including behavior, mood, and focus. Low serotonin levels can be directly linked to depression and anxiety. Serotonin is found in much higher levels in blues, and this is important. Serotonin is central to the blues mindset and personality profile. Serotonin has extensive highways through the brain. As this chemical floods, lingers, and recedes from various brain regions, it affects attitudes and behaviors, and no brain system acts alone. Serotonin can increase levels of estrogen, which increases thinking, emotion, and memory. This is maybe why blues are more analytical and detail-focused, structured, quality-oriented, and reflecting individuals. Serotonin can also trigger the release of oxytocin, a chemical associated with trusting and the ability to figure out other people's states of mind. Remember, scrutinizing and fact-seeking. This could be viewed as a byproduct of the oxytocin release. All three of these chemicals are contributing factors and producing traits that forms a blue's good-natured manner, need to attach to family and community, and their tact and effective managerial skills. Serotonin also suppresses testosterone activity, particularly in the brain center associated with fear, aggression, and anger, the amygdala. This is why blues are effective socially, as they tend to be calm and self-confident, which generally fits well around all introverted and extroverted types. The levels of serotonin in blues is suppressing aggressive tendencies. Finally, serotonin also suppresses dopamine activity. This generates a blue's caution and contributes to their introversion. But don't confuse their cautiousness for fear. Several genes in the serotonin system have been associated with harm avoidance. While dopamine triggers exploration, therefore potential danger, serotonin actively puts on the brakes and manages safety. A blue's regard for loyalty being a duty also stems from their chemical makeup. While yellows are devoted to their own experiences, a red to their work, and green to the people or ideas around them, a blue is loyal to the wider community. However, rather than for purely selfish or egotistical reasons, this is seen more as a moral obligation born from within them. In many cases, they will take on a position of power or leadership as a duty over any kind of self-gain. This can be viewed as an extremely redeeming and attractive quality. Increased levels of serotonin makes people more cooperative, more suggestive, deliver fewer strict commands, and make less attempts to solve problems alone. This is a great set of leadership qualities, as rather than leading by using fear, aggression, or an iron fist, they lead by setting an example, encourage mass participation, and are able to galvanize larger groups to manufacture a strong collaborative effort. These traits make a blue extremely persistent and incredibly patient. Tenacious individuals, they can tolerate repetition. Not easily bored, their meticulous and perfectionist approach means a blue can excel in tasks that require repetition and sustained attention. This can even raise their levels of serotonin further. Studies have found a link to why some people repeat certain actions over and over when anxious, like making sure a door is locked or oven turned off, despite doing it several times before. Repeating the actions can release serotonin subconsciously, actively reducing anxiety. Similarly, a blue could be releasing even more serotonin the more they lock in and engage on such tasks that require this kind of prolonged repetition and attention. Order, rule keeping, sticking to plans, and closely following methods is all linked to serotonin and a real hallmark of the blue. Studies have found that blues consistently find that routine makes life feel more relaxing. Any interruptions or diversions will irritate them. The goal of a blue is always closure and to find resolution. Precision and high attention to detail is directly linked to high levels of serotonin. Because of this, a blue lives in a concrete reality. Their comfort zone is where details are known, proven, and verifiable. They rely on facts and are extremely uncomfortable with ambiguity. A blue is generally not the most creative individual, as serotonin does reduce the impulse to explore. However, where they lack in creativity, they excel with facts, numbers, and precise details. All blue traits, the ones you see here in this graphic and the ones we've discussed in this video, all add up to an extremely powerful trait, maybe one of the most redeeming qualities of a blue: conscientiousness, the quality of wishing to do one's work or duty well and thoroughly. This can have extremely positive and powerful impacts on both work, family, and romantic relationships. Psychological studies pin this to two basic traits: dutifulness and deliberation. Many subtraits that also contribute to their conscientious approach are linked to high serotonin levels, making blues extremely dedicated, serious, and trustworthy lovers in relationships, attentive, traditional, likely to focus more on their lover's needs, and generally possess the kind of qualities where they will invest everything they have into their relationship, family, work, and community. Now, on the surface, what we've discussed presents a blue as an extremely desirable character, but as I mentioned earlier, this all depends on the personality type making this assessment. Different character types may view a blue's traits from a different perspective. For example, those who are more morally flexible may find a blue's rule following and moral compass too rigid and possibly boring, or a little too serious to an extroverted red or yellow. This also extends further, whereby a blue's respect for authority and need to follow orders so closely can lead to potentially negative outcomes. History is rife with examples where the masses have followed authority down paths that didn't necessarily bring positive change or outcomes. I'm not saying this is a blue's doing, but just highlighting that rule following isn't always positive. It all depends on the rule, motives behind it, and perception of the person passing judgment. A blue's serious approach to relationships for some can be off-putting, overbearing, or even perceived as controlling. A blue often has a right way of doing things. This can make them perceived as stubborn, dogmatic, or even closed-minded. Emotional rigidity is linked to serotonin. The need to always follow rules, schedules, and traditions without exception can lead to fallouts and bickering in relationships over even small, seemingly mundane daily issues where opinions or personality differences clash. A blue's analytical, detail-focused, scrutinizing nature can also lead them to being overly critical, not a trait that bodes well in relationships long term. Also, a blue won't necessarily act on impulse or be spontaneous, a trait that can cause problems in relationships over time. Their realistic and cautious approach can also lead to pessimism and even fatalism, where they adopt the view that nothing will change, for example. A blue's stoicism, while admirable, can also devolve into self-loathing or even materialize, or at least be perceived as, the idea they are morally superior. Again, not traits we would necessarily want to celebrate, that can certainly cause friction or fallout with different personality profiles. Again, this highlights, like most traits, they can all have both positive and negative connotations associated with them depending on the context. But ultimately, these aren't flaws, just trade-offs. So that's the pure blue personality profile broken down. Let me know in the comments if you identify with the traits and characteristics we've discussed today, or maybe you notice them in friends, family, work colleagues, or your romantic partner. Either way, it's my belief that above all, understanding personality profiles, what's driving the emergence of an individual's traits, and most importantly, identifying your own behavioral type, has transformative benefits in terms of how we can more effectively navigate relationships and create more long-lasting, meaningful ones in our lives. Next up, we explore a pure red director personality type. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're finding value in the content. And if this resonated, share it with someone who might vibe with a blue, and I'll see you in the next one.